Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and season's greetings. I am Ms. Omita Jagannath, Customer Service Officer of the Business Development and Communication Department here at the National Training Agency. Welcome to our final online session for 2020. You would have probably joined us for our first part of this discussion regarding TVET in the digitalized era. Our session today is focused on TVET in the digital era, NTA Services in the new normal. We hope this will greatly assist you, our valued stakeholders, as we move ahead, indeed, in the new normal. This morning, I will be joined by representatives from the Quality Assurance and Accreditation Department of the NTA, Mr. Anselm Simon, Quality Assurance Officer. Welcome, Mr. Simon. We wish to thank the Quality Assurance and Accreditation Manager, Mr. Dinesh Maharaj, and of course his entire unit for their support and invaluable contribution to this morning's initiative. As you would have seen in our invitation, today our presentation is going to cover adjustments to the Caribbean Association of National Training Authorities, CANTA, quality assurance criteria, Caribbean vocational qualification, as well as the assessment guidelines. As we head into this particular session, we know that you will stay tuned because we've all had to make adjustments as it pertains to the new normal. I'm sorry you'll be hearing this particular phrase pretty often, and I'm sure you're hearing it all over, but it's the best way we can define how we have to operate, given that we are still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're heading into a presentation this morning, and I invite you to please stay tuned. We do have someone live on our YouTube chat so that you can feel free to post your questions there, and we will definitely get to those questions again at the end of the session. I believe we're heading straight into the presentation. So I'll let our IT technicians take it away. Once again, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anselm Simon, and I am a Quality Assurance Officer attached to the National Training Agency. I would like to welcome each and every one of you, our valued stakeholders, to this online session entitled TVET in the Digital Era, the National Training Agency's Services in the New Normal. As we continue to cope with the global pandemic, COVID-19, the NTA, under the guidance of the Caribbean Association of National Training Agencies, CANTA, has made some adjustments to the policies and processes in CVQ delivery to ensure that the NTA, as the awarding body for the Caribbean vocational qualification, and you, our valued stakeholders and training providers, are able to continue to operate in a seamless yet safe manner. The topics to be covered during this session include adjustments to CANTA's quality assurance criteria and adjustments to the CVQ assessment guidelines. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented extraordinary circumstances for the TVET landscape both regionally and globally. Regionally, this has prompted CANTA to review every aspect of the CVQ delivery process, especially in the areas of assessment and evidence collection. NTA and CANTA encourages the use of electronic and digital technologies and other adjustments throughout the assessment process, since the health and safety of our stakeholders is of utmost priority. The adjustments being made will remain in place until otherwise advised and do not remove any existing requirements, since the NTA as an awarding body is still responsible for ensuring that TVET, CVQ training and delivery, and training and certification under TTNVQ still remains robust, fit for purpose, and is in keeping with the CBET approach. As we move through the presentation, we'll touch on planning and preparation for TVET programs, assessment requirements, types of assessment adjustments, and the expected interactions with the external verifiers. We will start with preparation and planning, which would go through 4 steps. risk assessment, review of existing policies and procedures, required collaborative approaches, and finally, documentation and communication. The management of training providers or facilities should conduct a risk assessment, reviewing their activities as it relates to training and assessment, looking closely at activities that may pose a risk to health and safety given the current COVID-19 situation. It should include assessments for trainees on work experience and based on trainee placement to determine if the activity or process should be waived or adjusted to ensure the minimal exposure and risk to the disease. And the second step, CANTA recommends a review of the assessment policies and procedures. Training providers should review the assessment policies and procedures to identify any changes that are required, paying specific attention to learners' training, work placement, and workplace situation. Training providers may have to consider the possibility of different modalities for course delivery and assessment, including blended learning and shifting to virtual assessment for certain skills. Consideration must also be given to the choice of information and communication technology being utilized to ensure that they are fit for purpose and properly deployed in this instance, from software platforms to hardware such as HD cameras, based on the specific skill that's being delivered. Inclusion and collaboration are essential to your next steps as a training provider. The individuals with the responsibility to assess, for example, the CVQ coordinators, the internal verifiers, the assessors, must meet with the instructors and other staff assigned to deliver the different skills to decide on the appropriate digital technology to be utilized to deliver the program. Some of these examples might be Skype or Zoom. This is to review and adjust the assessment instruments, the assessment methodology, and approaches, bearing in mind the need to maintain the principles of assessment while ensuring the health and safety of both the trainees and the staff of the center. The fourth consideration is documentation and communication. So once you would have conducted your risk assessment, you would have carried out your communication with staff, planned your way forward during this time of the new normal. You now have to document and effectively communicate this information to the relevant parties, including your instructors, assessors, internal verifiers, trainees, candidates, and employers. This should be done before the reopening of your facility and before any assessments are undertaken. We will now move on to the assessment with the adjustments to CVQ assessment guidelines. First and foremost, the assessment cycle should not change as a result of the COVID-19 situation. The process shall still follow the steps: plan, conduct, feedback, and review. Under planning, the learner and assessor should agree on the assessment plan, observing social distancing, or by using available technology to reduce exposure. The assessor is also required to conduct the assessment in order to decide on the learner's competence. So given the current COVID-19 situation and the requirements for social distancing, etc., that doesn't exclude or create a situation where the assessor has the option of not opting out of the assessment. The assessment must still take place to assess the learner's competence. The assessor must also provide feedback about his or her decision to the learner and can also take on board feedback from the learner on the assessment process with an aim to improve the process. Valid and reliable evidence of competence is required for all units assessed or covered in the training program. Assessors are encouraged to emphasize the practical application of the assessment criteria, and where a unit requires observation as primary and or predominant assessment method, this should be attempted. In all instances of adjustment or changes, information should be recorded on the required form, signed off, and made available for both internal and external verifiers when requested as part of their verification exercises. This is to ensure the effective maintenance of the quality management system or the quality systems that are in place at the training provider's location. In the event that it is still possible for assessors to conduct assessments by observation, they must ensure proper social distancing guidelines are developed and also followed. Assessors should also be open to other methods of assessment that cover the requirements of the unit or qualification. For example, virtual assessments using platforms such as Zoom, expert witness testimony, interviews, etc. But these alternatives need to be effectively planned, implemented, reviewed, and revised if necessary. There are also some additional assessment requirements. Assessment planning should consider methods that take the individual circumstances of each learner and their respective training environment into consideration. Based on the planning of the program, scheduling, and available resources, training providers and facilities should, if required, extend learner times for CVQ training. We must take into consideration the fact that in planning your program, you have the teaching time, you have the assessment time, and then you'd have the internal verification and external verification processes. In these processes, you now need to include the guidelines under the Ministry of Health and any adjustments advised by CANTA for social distancing and the safe delivery of your program. This may call for reduced class sizes on specific days, the utilization of a bigger space to ensure that there is efficient spacing, etc. So all these are considerations that need to be taken on board when planning for your cycles. Where possible, practical training and assessment should be scheduled at a facility that will allow for effective social distancing and reduction of exposure. Also, records should be kept as to the attendance and also any other alterations that may occur. The leveraging of technology by training providers at this time is encouraged. They can consider conversion of documentation to electronic formats like PDF, scanned PDFs, for storage and distribution electronically throughout their institution and externally to entities like the NTA during the external verification processes. We also encourage the banking of such documents as a redundancy. So we encourage training providers to scan and upload, scan and store both their registration and their assessment documents for ease of access throughout the training and assessment period. Another consideration is the use of, where possible or where feasible, online rather than paper-based tests, or carrying out assessments remotely rather than face-to-face, all to limit exposure and risk. Trainees are also encouraged to have logbooks in which all graded assignments, theory and practical, are continuously documented as evidence of performance, of continuous assessment, and these can be utilized as sources of evidence for later assessments and even the external verification process. And also to utilize e-portfolios for submission to the external verifiers or awarding bodies as evidence of final certification. So we have some additional assessment requirements. Training providers and/or assessors should widen the assessment window when assessments are being conducted, because it's a priority for us to ensure the safety of staff and trainees alike, working with special constraints and other stressors. The period of time for an assessment may need to be increased and may even require being spread across a longer time frame, even several days. So these are some of the considerations that should be taken on board. Where group assessments are usually conducted, for example, in the construction sector, IT, data operations, performing arts, candidates should remain in the same group, maintaining social distancing practices, and a log of the composition of the groups should be kept just in case contact tracing is required post the assessment. So we are ensuring that we limit the possibility of spread by ensuring proper social distancing, ensuring proper health and safety implements are in place, and also, just in case, God forbid, we end up in a situation where there's a case, we also have a methodology to trace who individuals may have come in contact with. During this time, as mentioned before, we continue to encourage the use of electronic mediums, including video and audio solutions. Videos can be used to capture professional discussions and/or witness testimony, as well as observe naturally occurring work activity. By utilizing software applications, devices such as cell phones, and even on a larger scale using single or multi-camera setups may be required for a specific option or skill area. Think about it. You have a welder in a workshop, and let's say you utilize a multi-camera setup. You'd have one authenticating the identity of the welder, and you could have two other cameras placed strategically so that you could actually see the welder, the craftsman, performing the actual practical application of the skill that they learned. We also recommend the use of audio links and audio files. Audio links may be used to capture interviews, professional discussions, oral questioning, and/or witness testimony. Right? One of the form of evidence gathering during, let's say, for an external verification visit might be oral questioning. Right? So these are possible sources of evidence that could be used not only as for assessors, but also during the external verification procedures. Next, we'll talk about types of assessment adjustments. Adoptions that may be used by assessors to provide evidence of candidates' performance include conducting virtual assessments, expert witness testimony, interviews, reflections, simulated work or simulations, oral questioning and answer, portfolio and e-portfolio presentation. So it starts with conduct virtual assessments. Practical observation should be taken remotely using audiovisual remote technologies. Learners may also use video technology and software to record themselves demonstrating competence or skills, as I would have mentioned in the previous slide. Providing verbal narrative to explain what they are doing is key. This demonstrates that not only is the candidate able to execute the skill, but they would demonstrate knowledge and theoretical backstopping through their explanation of what is being carried out. This brings to the fore the question of authentication. A third party should sign off on the authenticity of the recording. So these recordings should not be done alone. They should be done they should be witnessed by assessor or another authority, the internal verifier, or some representative of the training institution who would now sign off on the authenticity of the recording. We'd also look at expert testimony. This refers to the use of additional expert witness testimonies from qualified individuals to act as evidence in place of assessment activities, like direct observation. These could be obtained remotely using digital recording devices or using fully verified emails from employers, supervisors, or managers. This would serve as a verification or assessment step for both PLAR and also the standard course delivery for CVQ or TTNBQ. For programs where there's a job placement component, you could have an interview remotely via platforms like Zoom, GoToMeet, or even GoMeeting that can now verify the ability of the candidate. Interviews, guided and professional discussions. This activity may be captured using digital recording devices. Professional discussion should be considered as supplemental evidence, such as previous assessor observations. Interviews with professionals and/or guided discussions may be used to create work-based evidence, an occasion when competence needs to be demonstrated, where it is not possible for the learner to be observed. These methods may also be used instead of a practical assessment. Prior to COVID-19, interviews and professional discussions were typically limited to CVQ level 3 or higher. They may now be extended to CVQ levels 1 and 2. The internal verifier should ensure that the level of questioning used is suitable for the particular CVQ level and is also fit for purpose. When presenting or developing your questionnaire for the interview, you could consider practical-based questions or scenario-based questions, which would force the candidate to think and reason and problem solve, as opposed to asking questions related to definitions. Verbal personal statements and reflective accounts by the candidates are other options that may be presented as forms of evidence, demonstrating the learning and competence of the candidates. They may be recorded and submitted electronically to the assessor. Simulations of workplace activities would also be considered and made available to the verifier as part of the verification activity. These activities, example, verbal statements and simulations, could also be recorded and be provided as evidence in an electronic format. Another option is oral questioning / question and answer. The question and answer session should be conducted by an assessor, must be recorded in written or verbal format and linked to the assessment criteria. Usually an assessor would have developed a list of questions and the required answers or responses. Where tests are multiple choice in nature, these may be conducted online using platforms. Available to training providers and learners are both paid platforms and also free platforms. They may require a little tweaking or adjustment to fit your needs, but they are all available and are highly recommended during this time. Where questions have images or tables, These may either be shared with the candidate via screen sharing or printed and rephrased around the image. The use of e-portfolios are also encouraged where possible. I actually had the experience of viewing several e-portfolios at an external verification visit recently, and it provided a lot of evidence and demonstration of the candidate's ability, and it was properly captioned, so you got a clear understanding of what activities they were performing and what were some of the health and safety requirements and skill requirements that are required in the execution. So videos and recordings are acceptable in our e-portfolios. Simulation assessments should not be a predominant source of evidence of the competency in the portfolio, but should be backstopped by video evidence and other recordings. Some of the formats that are outside of our video portfolio include presentations in PowerPoint. From my experience, I would have seen e-portfolios that were a 30 slide or 40 slide PowerPoint presentation, and each section of the presentation was in line with the specific units of the standard and arranged in the same way. We will now look briefly at interactions with the external verifier. So we would have gone through planning and execution of assessments, and at the tail end, just before the CVQ issuance, you'd have the external verification. During this vital stage in the issuance of the CVQ certification, evidence gathering is important to the evaluation of the candidate's performance and the competence and the skill being reviewed. We must look at communication between the assessor, internal verifier, and the external verifier to ensure effective plans are laid for the external verification visit. The external verifier and the quality assurance officer would provide additional support through discussions and verification meetings, which we recommend should be held virtually as much as possible. These can be facilitated using phone calls and virtual meeting platforms such as Zoom, Google Meet, and GoToMeeting, just to name a few. Plans, once confirmed, should be digitized and circulated to all parties. The training providers administration, the NTA representatives, the assessors, the IVs, and the EVs to ensure everyone is on the same page. Electronic records of all simulated activities should be maintained and made available to the external verifier as part of the verification process. Not a requirement of CANTA, but a recommendation is once you have these items in electronic format, providing them before the start of the external verification visit would not only make the process more streamlined, but also serve as a starting point for the planning of the actual external verification. These can also include scanned copies of achievement sheets, e-portfolios, and any video evidence that may support the units being claimed for the candidates. All logbooks and portfolios must be retained for sampling by the external verifier on behalf of the awarding body, the NTA. This can be provided before the date of the EV to provide effective review and a reduction of exposure for training providers, staff, and the staff conducting the external verification visit. This information would feed into and inform the methods of sampling to be utilized by the external verifier, the modality of the exercise, be it virtual or physical, and would influence the planning process for both EVs and quality audits going forward, as these may be conducted virtually if a physical presence is not required or necessary. Our presentation has come to an end. and we would have briefly covered the adjustments to the CANTA quality assurance criteria and the CVQ assessment guidelines, including some of the measures to be taken to ensure continued operation of the CVQ issuance process. On behalf of the National Training Agency, I'd like to thank you for your attention during this presentation, as well as we proceed to reinforce the CVQ delivery with an aim to ensure the safety and sustainability of these programs as we navigate these uncertainties caused by the global pandemic. At this time, we would like to hear from you, our valued stakeholders, what questions, concerns, and comments you may have on the adjustments presented today. Thank you.
Good morning again, everyone. The voice that you heard on that presentation is our very own Anselm Simon. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Ms. Jagannath. Thank you for the warm welcome and thank you for the opportunity to share this presentation this morning.
It was a very, very comprehensive presentation, and I would just like you to reiterate for us. I mean, all of the persons that are joining us today would know about the importance of quality assurance. But just to remind all of us, what is the importance? What is the role of quality assurance?
Okay, the role of quality assurance in education essentially is to ensure quality delivery of programs in a fair manner. When I say a fair manner, we speak to the processes involved in assessment, internal verification, and then at the end, before CVQ issuance, the external verification. We as the NTA as the gatekeepers for TVET in Trinidad and Tobago, we have to ensure that training providers and institutions delivering programs in TVET are able to support the programs that they embark on, right, and conduct the programs to the benefit of the end user or the final stakeholder or candidates.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I've gathered from this presentation that quality assurance processes have been affected by this ongoing pandemic. Can you just give us a little summary of what are the key things that are being affected by this pandemic in terms of quality assurance in TVET?
Okay, in terms of quality assurance in TVET, the pillars previously described remain intact. What we would have had to modify would have been the modality in which we conduct some of the initiatives. Some of these initiatives include our audit procedures, our external verification procedures, our quality enhancement procedures, and also the way we monitor our TVET training providers. COVID-19 has created several detractors and also provided us as the NTA with an opportunity to streamline some of our processes. So you see us now leveraging technology in the way that we conduct our business and carry out these quality assurance processes.
Yes, I saw from your very thorough description in your presentation, there's a lot of incorporation for electronic options, for assessments. I see that you even make mention of a reasonable adjustment form. Where can our training providers, first of all, access this presentation you just did for us? Where will we be making this presentation available for them?
I believe at the end of this session, the marketing department, in addition to the IT department, would be sending out an email to the stakeholders directly to invite you, and they may also make it available on the NTA's website, ntatt.org.
Right. We'll also be recording this particular session. For anyone who wishes to review this session, you can just click on the link that we use to invite you, and you will be able to access this entire session, including the questions that I'm hoping will come up. Feel free to insert your questions in our chat, ladies and gentlemen, and I will indeed have them addressed, because we're now into the discussion part of our forum. In terms of all of the things that you covered, I know this would have come out of CANTA. CANTA being the Caribbean Association of National Training Authorities. NTA is a member, and it's comprised of all of the NTAs in the Caribbean. We recognize that because of the ongoing pandemic, these adjustments would have had to be made for the new normal.
Correct.
1 second here. Trying to make sure that we cover all the things that we have to cover. Okay, so I'm getting a signal that there is a question on the chat. So while I'm waiting for that to be sent to me, right. Basically, we wanted to ask you, while we're waiting that question, Anselm, how has the overall outlook of the sector meaning TVET for training providers, how has the outlook changed at all in this COVID-19 pandemic?
The outlook essentially would have migrated from mostly face-to-face delivery of programs to now more of a blended learning modality for the delivery of programs, for the execution of the internal quality assurance processes for the training providers, which is the internal verification, and also where NTA interacts at the end pre-certification with the external verification. To be honest, Ms. Juggernaut, both the NTA and our stakeholders have honestly risen to the occasion. They have taken upon themselves the task of inclusion of information and communication technologies in both the delivery of their programs and also the quality assurance steps required for the successful completion of these programs.
Wonderful. I'm still waiting on the question here, but I had some other questions prepared. Give me 1 second. What we wanted to know, Mr. Simon, is I see that you made mention of making sure that social distancing, contact tracing, and health and safety overall is a consideration for all of the techniques that are recommended. Am I correct?
Correct, yes.
If a training provider is a little bit concerned about how they can now incorporate different techniques in terms of their assessments, etc., who should they contact at the NTA?
At the NTA, you can reach out to Mr. Dinesh Maraj. He's the Manager of Quality Assurance and Accreditation. Right? He will be more than willing to assist, right, with providing information on how you can conduct the assessments and the internal verifications with taking on board the health and safety requirements as we navigate through the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, so we have the question coming in from YouTube. Practical assessments can be conducted remotely, but as an approved CVQ center. Is that correct? I believe this is coming out of a Mr. Richardson.
Yes, that is correct. The approved CVQ center, as I would have mentioned in the presentation, would now have to go through a process of risk management where you'd be looking at the programs that you're delivering, right? Decide upon the modality of delivery, given your current context, your infrastructure. One of the things that we speak to specifically is the space allotment at your center, right? CANTA would have advised that in a situation where you'd have had group assessments being done, you allow for extended period of time to ensure that even though a group assessment is being conducted, that you also provide for sufficient social distancing, right? So all that would come through in the planning process. And as an approved CVQ provider, once the planning process is completed and you begin the process of executing these new initiatives in the new normal, one of the central components is communication. To communicate that to every level of your institution, including from top level, the coordinator, center coordinators, to the assessors, instructors, the IVs, and even reinforcing with the candidates, right? Once a candidate sets foot on your property or at your center, they become your responsibility. So continuous reinforcement at that level is also required.
Okay. So we see here, you mentioned blended learning, you mentioned incorporation of technology, you mentioned adjustments. I noted where the indication was to scan and store your records, for example, and having been involved in quality assurance for some time as well within the NTA and outside of it, I have to ask the question. This is a question coming from me.
Okay.
Does the training provider still need to keep the physical document? Or do they just scan it and discard it?
No, as a form of redundancy, it is essential that you keep records, right? Having them scanned would be a form of redundancy. So you still need to keep the physical hard copy documents, right? And also we advise that you keep an online copy just in case of, natural disaster or any occurrence that would destroy your copies of the assessment.
All right, so the same policies that you would have incorporated for the physical storage still apply. We're just moving on to engaging technology and that sort of thing.
Correct, and that provides an opportunity for the training provider to streamline their processes.
Okay.
We've seen since we came back out to do external verification visits, we've had training providers send us assessment documents, the achievement sheet, the IV reports directly. And this now provides a forum whereby the quality assurance officer and the technical expert is now able to review these documents before propose effective plans to reduce exposure to both the staff of the NTA, the staff of the center, and also the candidates.
So you're basically saying that there's been an increase in efficiency by streamlining these processes as well. Yeah. So I see that we probably don't have any additional questions. We have a few comments. As I said, having viewed the presentation this morning myself, this would have been the first time I would have seen it. I found it very, very thorough. And I know that when the need arises, we can review these documents at our leisure so that we can apply the knowledge. So we see here that we're getting some feedback, and I'm happy to see it's positive. Great presentation with practical strategies that can be readily and easily implemented. Again, ladies and gentlemen, we still have about 10 minutes remaining for the session, so feel free to insert your comments and your questions into our live YouTube chat so that we will be able to address them. Is there anything, whilst we're watching to see if there are any more questions coming in, is there anything else, Anselm, that probably comes to mind that we would want to encourage our training providers to embrace this new normal, the new guidelines and all of that? Is there anything else you wanted to share with them before we move on?
As mentioned before, look at COVID-19 as what it is. We've had a situation where we are in dire straits. There's a serious death toll around the globe. Thankfully, in our country and in our region, it's to a lesser extent. But we need to take the positives out of the situation and utilize this time, this season, to improve upon our processes and leverage the available technology out there. Right? At the end of the day, I think that we'll be able to come out of this pandemic better than we were pre-COVID-19.
And of course, we at the National Training Agency, all of our departments, our quality assurance, our occupational standards, all of us, we are here to lend support, to make sure we are all on the same page. And as I'm saying that, I'm seeing that there's a comment that came in. Thank you, NTA, for this initiative. This information is important as it enables all involved to be on the same page. Yeah. So I'm waiting to see if there are any more questions. All right. So we know that we got an excellent turnout today. We know this is a very important presentation. And we also know that we need some time to digest the information. So I've just been advised that you can, I'm getting a signal that we have some more questions coming in. Excuse me a minute while the technology catches up to me. Or is it that while I catch up to the technology? And while I'm waiting for that, I just want to remind everyone, as Anselm and myself just said, this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel in its entirety, so you can feel free to review at your leisure. And again, we are available right here at the National Training Agency to address any concerns you may have. We have a question coming in. Good morning. Will there be any adjustment dates for the submission of portfolios for the secondary schools, in particular, given the practical delays? So let's see, I believe this might be a question that would be addressed by our CVQ in schools. Would there be any adjustments and dates for submission of portfolios for secondary schools in particular, given the practical delays? Is this something we can speak to, Anselm?
Just a general comment. As we deal with the new normal, the National Training Agency would be trying its best to work with our stakeholders, including CVQ schools, and where our formal request is sent to the NTA, we try our best to accommodate given the current situation.
Okay, so we have some people getting excited and sending in more questions. I'm really happy about this. See, we gave you a little 10 more minutes here, and now everybody's realizing now we need to get the questions in. So here we go. Good morning. Can you give an example of what would be an acceptable entry for Section E of the Ivy report that speaks to physical facilities if the online environment is being used?
Okay. For Section E, that speaks specifically to facilities. If you're doing an online assessment, we have to look at it from two aspects. One from the viewer and one from the candidate conducting the actual conducting the assessment or performing the skill, right? With respect to facilities, we need to look at things like lighting. We need to look at things as cameras and camera resolution, and also the platform being utilized for the assessment, right? To give a practical example, if you're doing an online assessment, off-site, meaning that the candidate is at one location, and let's say the assessor and Ivy are remote, or the assessor or the Ivy is remote, we'd have to ensure that the platform being utilized is able to carry the assessment for the time duration. For example, Zoom, the free version, has a limit of 45 minutes. Yeah. So if the assessments would go further, it might be worthwhile for the training provider to invest in another version of the platform. We'd also look at the camera setup. As I would have mentioned in the presentation, you could have a single to multi-camera setup, right? If you're doing a multi-camera setup, first thing that you need to do is ensure that you have a camera with a resolution that's able to authenticate the identity of the candidate, and then other cameras that could be utilized to focus on the performance of the skill itself. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and as you spoke about platforms, someone is asking, Mr. Richardson is asking, any recommendations on e-portfolio platforms?
I wouldn't give a recommendation, but like what I've seen and been impressed by, with respect to e-portfolios, the simplest version I've seen is a PowerPoint presentation, where they have separated it, same way they would have separated a physical portfolio into the sections. They'd have a table of contents, etc. on the PowerPoint slide, and they would have included both still shots and also embedded videos within the PowerPoint presentation, right? The modality ranges from a PowerPoint presentation or a scanned version of a portfolio to as far as I have seen for the skill and tuning, a full edited video recording, so a full digitized portfolio from start to finish, showing how they would have prepped the pan, how they would have what about tuning, and this gave the candidate the opportunity to actually spell out, you know, exactly what notes they're tuning, the methodology, the burning, etc. Right? So this situation gives you the opportunity to
be creative.
Correct, and utilize many different forms. Okay. So we'd accept PowerPoint presentations, scanned or digitized copies of our portfolio, and video evidence. And from the ED that I've recently conducted, most of the candidates have phones, so they're able to give you video evidence, and even multi-directional shots. They're pretty important.
Yeah, everybody's a filmmaker these days.
Right.
So I think we have the final question before we close for this morning. Alvin Kamraj said, sorry he joined us a little bit late, but how does center approval audit apply now? Let me see if I'm reading that correctly. How does center approval audits apply now? And I guess he's asking about the audit of the center approval.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Very good question, Mr. Kamraj. With respect to center approval, as with the EV, we'll be utilizing or leveraging the technology available. For centers that have already had approval, such as yourself, you may be required to submit digitized versions of the records related to the section of the criteria that we'll be looking at, so that we'll be able to do a desktop review before the actual audit. And then once we have that information in front of us, the NTA would now be able to effectively plan the modality of the audit. So the audit may be a mixed mode audit, where we have some face-to-face with the proper social distancing and other COVID-19 guidelines in place, and or we have a virtual situation where we contact you via Zoom and hold the requisite interview, etc., and have you provide evidence of you deploying your quality management system.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful use of technology, which is what we're using this morning, incidentally, to do this live from our boardroom here in Chaguanas. So we also have a question from Marsha Singh. Will it be acceptable to use short tutorials and vlogs?
Yes.
I'm assuming this is in terms of assessments, portfolios. Okay. Will it be acceptable to use short tutorials and vlogs? And the answer, yes. The short answer to that is yes.
Correct, yes. So for example, for a situation like data operations, you may be able to conduct a simulation for customer interaction. For that specific unit in the standard, we'd actually accept video evidence, vlogs, and even voice recording, as mentioned in the presentation. Right? One of the examples of the utilization of voice recordings would have been a candidate interacting over the phone, which is one of the units covered under the data ops standard.
Right.
So they related it and they used technology and actually recorded it. It had an actual call. Still trying to figure out what app they would have utilized to record the call, but they would have got it.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, I find it so very exciting, and I'm happy to see that we've all stepped up to be able to indeed deal with the new normal. And I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, but that does not mean that we're not available to respond to you. Please be sure to stay tuned to our social media, our different channels, and you can always contact us. We look forward to partnering with the Quality Assurance Department again, because I believe we're also going to be hosting sessions in the new year that cover things like monitoring, evaluation, external verification. So we have a lot of exciting things to look forward to. And you know what, Anselm, I think that actually brings us to the end of our time for this morning. And I want to thank you so much for, putting together this presentation and for chatting with me, responding to the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we do have to close now. That's the end of today's discussion. And it was my pleasure to take you through not just this morning's online session, but through the series. And once again, please make sure that you view the session on our YouTube channel. All of our sessions are there. We also would like you to, stay tuned to our social media, as I mentioned. Feel free to put your questions there for us. We will get back to you. Our social media platforms, our websites, and all of our services are accessible on our website as we all engage in a new normal. As I close off this morning, I want to wish you all season's greetings. Remember to stay safe, wear your masks, adhere to the current restrictions as we all work towards slowing the spread of the COVID-19. And everyone, please have a safe season. Take care. God bless.
Thank you.